Hello.
Welcome to our webinar, everybody. Today you will hear about Transifex Native, why and how we created it, and how it can simplify your localization processes. You'll also get to see a live demo of Transifex Native and get a chance to ask any questions you might have. My name is Lilia, and I'm a marketing program manager here at Transifex. I'm located on the East Coast of the US, and today we have not one, but two Dimitris for you. We have Dimitris Glazos, the CEO of Transifex, and he is located in Silicon Valley, California, on the West Coast of the US. And we have Dimitris Bendilas, who is an engineering manager, and he is located in Athens, Greece. A quick bit of housekeeping before we get started. The first portion of this webinar will be a presentation and a live demo. If you have a question that comes to mind or you need clarification on something as you're hearing things, feel free to type it on the right-hand side on the chat panel, and we will try to address your questions live as much as possible. Don't feel like you have to save them, until the end. That said, we will have a Q&A session at the end for about 15 minutes or so, and you can ask questions as well. And at that point, you'll have a chance to unmute your mic, or we can unmute you, and you can ask them live if you don't feel like typing. All right, so with that, I'll pass it off to Dimitris Glazos to kick off the presentation.
Hey, everyone. Good to have you guys here. Thanks for joining us. Good morning, good afternoon, wherever you guys are. Lilia and Panayoti from our demand gen team, thanks for putting this together. And I hope everyone is safe with everything going on with COVID. And our thoughts are out to everyone out there, like being affected by everything going on with racism, discrimination, intolerance, and our thoughts go to everyone who is fighting for these causes as well. So we're really excited. I'm here with Dimitri, one of our core engineering members, and we have a soft spot for this project. We've been talking about this for many years with customers between us, and we're really excited that we're starting that we have this live now, and we can get you guys involved and get it out there. Again, I'm Dimitri. I'm the founder of Transifex. Started the company 10 years ago. And Dimitri, why don't you introduce yourself as well to your voice?
Yeah, I'm Dimitrios. I'm an engineer manager, and I've been with Transifex for the past 3 years.
So Dimitri has been a core member of the team that has developed Transifex Native. So today, what we'd like to do is go over some of the observations that we've been making, like as we were working with some of our customers. We're talking about these issues of how to make sure that software localization is good and nice, and the user experience for developers and people that are bringing the content in is super crisp and awesome. And we've been talking about it internally. We've been talking it with probably 100 of our 700 customers and people out there in the industry, like prospects, partners. So we want to talk a little bit about what we're learning, like what's our point of view, I guess, on the state of the art of software localization today, how we're reimagining the localization stack, what do we want to fix, and what are the design elements and guidelines that we followed and the decisions that we took as we were developing this. And then we're going to go over some specifics of what we have released so far, which is the first version of this new framework. And Dimitris will go over a demo for around 10 minutes with more deep dive on the features. I highly encourage everyone to send questions in the chat as we speak. I really like it's nice to make this interactive and engage with you guys and focus on the things that are the most important. Good. So what are our observations as we were working with all these people and like the data that we collected? Well, the most important thing, I guess, is that software localization is hard. For many companies, it's a black art, really. Like you have your code, right, and you mark your phrases for localization using different frameworks: Python, Java, mobile like iOS, Android, and then even for different web apps and JavaScript apps, like it's different. So all these source files end up somewhere, usually committed in the Git version control. and then they end up in Transifex, and then Transifex exports all these translation files, which are also stored into the version control system, and then they end up somehow in the code in the application. So this seems like top-down, like really simple, nice, a nice diagram. In reality, it's way more complicated than that. Mainly because you have all these different files living in different Git systems, Git repositories, and also different branches. So some of our customers have for each.
I think the slides. I think we can see the intro. Okay, now we see the slide. Okay.
Okay. Thank you. So yes, so the source files really live in multiple branches. So it's not just a couple of source files. Usually, you have some of our customers have for each project of theirs, they have 100 files. Like I think Atlassian has more than 100 language files just for Jira, and that's for one branch. Many of our customers have hundreds of branches, dozens to hundreds of branches open at the same time. And then not all projects in a company obviously use the same Git repository. There are multiple Git repositories, and in many cases, there are multiple continuous integration systems involved. So the mobile apps might use their own build system. So this means that you have sometimes thousands of source files scattered in your repos at the same time. And all those translation files, they're even one more order of magnitude bigger. So this architecture causes a lot of issues for companies. Well, first and foremost, they make localization really complex. There's just too many files all over the place. No system out there has really good support for branching. Like most of them say that they do, but in reality, there are challenges with that. There's challenges like it's very hard to say, give me all the phrases that appear in this branch, but not in this branch, or let me only translate the phrases that were introduced in this branch. Because you're working on top of files, all the complexity around figuring out how to bridge branches and products is sent to the TMS, to the translation management system, and it's really difficult for us to do that really well, the way that things are today. And then you have just too many file formats. A typical customer of ours might have 6 or 8 different file formats. And, for a developer that focuses only on one platform, that's probably okay. If you're a Ruby on Rails developer, you like YAML files, right? But quite often the problem is is thrown over the wall to translators and to the content operations people, I guess, to figure out, because not all file formats support the same functionality. Not all of them support developer comments, plurals, genders, and other like metadata around the phrases themselves. Some of them are ID based, and because they're ID based, searching and replace is not as simple as it sounds. Usually with ID based file formats, you want more specificity around what you search and replace. And then you have all this content duplication across your files. Because you're sending files to your translation management system, most of these files are exactly the same across them. And you're relying on translation memory to bridge the gaps, but that's a whole different beast, and it's very translator specific. Developers and content people don't really worry about translation memory. It's not a tool built for them. And then most of these, as I said, most of these file formats don't support good context for translators. And just having all these files creates so many manual steps in the process that make it really difficult for localization to keep up with development. And of course, manual processes means failure points. It's so easy. It's so easy for a developer to say, you know what, I finished the work here, start translation, and then they find another small phrase change. So now you need to send new files for translation. And if your TMS doesn't support really well this process, it's just super complicated. The reason that this is happening is that most localization and internationalization libraries are really old. They have been built in a way that it made sense many years ago, but it doesn't make sense for complex branching support, this agile way of working. It just doesn't. And most of the problems stem from this issue. So we took a big step back. Transifex, our focus is obviously developers and product teams and creating a great user experience for them. So we thought, okay, how can we make this work really nicely? How can we build something that in 5 years from now is going to be the standard of how we localize products? And we're going to forget how things were happening before. Like if you ask most developers, they don't even say stories about how development was done before Git, right? Like we're thinking like localization eventually will reach a point where it's going to be like that. So how can we create this really nice experience for developers and content people, content production people, I guess, in the product teams? Well, first and foremost, we should enable localization to start really, really quickly. Make it so easy that developers will want to start and they will find this exciting for the first time, probably. So can you make it so simple that it's so easy to go on? And then can we make sure that it's agile, super fast? Can we make sure that we can pass as much context as possible to translators? And how can we make sure that content people like product managers, designers, anyone that worries about, you know, this pixel perfection of how the user perceives the product, they can make tweaks to the content without bothering developers all the time by opening a Jira ticket or worse, like commenting on a pull request to just go and fix an exclamation mark on a button. Can we make sure, can we help people manage their phrases outside of the code? Can we make everything to be managed in a single place, the single source of truth for all the content, rather than all these files scattered around? So that's what we set up to do, I guess. That was our vision behind this. And here's some of the actual, once we started designing this is some of the things that we put down as our design principles. First and foremost, keep it really simple. Create something that is elegant and nice and simple and clean. The second one was we wanted to eliminate files. Eliminate files from version control systems altogether. The fact that you have the files create all the complexity that we saw. It's like a corner piece in this puzzle. Can we send the content over the air like all the other web apps and web frameworks are doing? They're focusing on content being pushed on the cloud. Can we make content management really simple and fun for people, even for developers, or maybe just get it out of their way? And then let's rely on standards wherever we can rather than reinvent the wheel, so that the solution is as compatible with what's out there as possible. And then make it as extensible as possible. And then another thing was we felt that this has to be open source. In order for it to become a new paradigm and get as many companies as possible to adopt it, we have to make it open source. So with this design principle, we set out and we designed this. We designed a system where there are pretty much 3 big components. There's the framework-specific SDKs that developers can just install, and then with just one line of script, I guess, to install, you can just get started with localization really easy without understanding all the complexity with TMSs and all of these things and formats and things like that. Create SDKs that are really framework specific and very easy to adopt. The second thing that we decided to do is use ICU, which is the International Components for Unicode Standard, which is basically a syntax on how you want to, how can I tell the localization engine, this is the phrase and this is how it should be, it should look for translators. We decided to use ICU instead of, like, for example, Mozilla says Fluent, because ICU is very widely used. It's been around the block for a while. There are good libraries for it, and we can rely on something that people know and they can use. Again, wide adoption is the key here. Get as much alignment behind this as possible. The other thing that we decided was our engine should be keyless, shouldn't use IDs. It should be based on content, so developers can just write their phrase, and that will work. They don't have to create an ID and then save the phrase in another file and go back and forth. That kind of complexity is not something that we wanted. The other component of the architecture is, as you're writing code, and Dimitris will demo this, as you're writing code, we have a script that basically parses all the code and identifies all these phrases for you and extracts those phrases. And this script was really important because we feel that unless we have something like this to help developers make sure that all their content is captured well and they haven't forgotten something, is really critical. And there are companies out there that have done like good work around this area, and it's working well for companies, and it's helping companies get started with localization much faster. So the other component here, compared to dynamic translation, is in many cases like a mobile app, you do want translations to be cached and downloaded on the user's device before you go live. You don't want people to switch to Hebrew, for example, on your cell phone and then wait for the download to come. So pre-parsing and making sure that your code is ready with the content was critical. The other big component was we wanted to decouple Transifex from your web servers to make sure that when our servers are down or when there's a security issue or whatever, no good, then your systems will not be affected. So it was super important. So we developed a small, pretty much like a content delivery network service, we call it CDS, that takes the content, puts it on a server in your infrastructure, that then deploys the content to the web servers. This way, all the web servers do not rely on Transifex. And because there's this service in place, we can deploy content directly, or companies, people, our customers can deploy content to this service, which then delivers to the web servers itself. Better security, more scalability, using internal infrastructure, all these critical components for enterprise localization. And then a couple of other smaller things. Again, Dimitris will demo this. We wanted a good engine that retrieves context that is also extensible, because we feel that we can get more and more really good context by running code in the application itself rather than relying on a file format. Then we wanted to have as much context as possible. Today we support developer comments, context for a phrase, character limit restrictions for translators to know that this should be smaller. And then developers can even attach tags on the phrases that eventually show up in our editor and to translators. And these tags might be, this phrase shows up in the subscription system of my web app. It might mean that it's an important phrase. It might mean that this is a phrase shown to our enterprise customers, so they need to pay extra attention, whatever. Like, tags are arbitrary. The other thing, obviously, we want to have rich support for placeholders, variables, plurals, genders, all of these awesome things that some of the best companies out there are using. And then we also wanted to include a pseudo localization engine to help developers test their localization even before they receive translations. Again, this is our version 1, and it's open source. So this is the first set of functionality that we felt is really important to have so that we can get started and get people to use. Transifex today uses this new engine to be localized, and we're having so much more fun because it's on this new technology rather than PO files that we had before. And we're using all of these things like much more frequently than we did before. So this was a good overview. I guess if you remember this picture that I showed before, we kind of took this and we really simplified it to this. Your code directly sends the content to Transifex. And then when the translations are done, they're sent to the content delivery service, which is either managed by us, Transifex, or it's open source again. Customers can install it on their own infrastructure, and we recommend that, which delivers then the content to the application. And all this with just a couple of lines of code. So that's the overview. I think we in Transifex really like going into details with demos. We're a product company after all. So I'd like to pass this to Dimitris now to just go over and show the actual details of this live in a demo.
Okay, thank you, Dimitri. I'm gonna share my screen. Let's give it a moment. Okay. So I'm going to showcase Transifex Native to you with a quick demo. And I'm going to use a Django application, a Django web app. So you can see a very simple web page here. This is created with Django. And if you take a look at the code, we'll see that the phrases here are static. They're hard-coded. So they're, we haven't marked anything for localization yet. So we're ready to integrate Transifex Native now and see how this can be done. The first thing we need to do is install the SDK. This is very simple and it's very fast. Okay. Now we're going back to the code. And here in the template, in the HTML template, we need to load the Transifex package. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to mark these 4 phrases here for localization. And I do that by using this special T tag here, which comes with the Transifex native package. Okay, let's go to the website again. I'm going to reload. We'll see that nothing changes, even if I switch a language. Sorry. Give me a moment here. Let me. Okay, I want to. I'll show that pseudo localization a bit later. Sorry about that. Let me show you the. Okay, this is the default behavior. So now we have these phrases here. They are shown in English. The reason is that there are no translations in German yet, so the SDK defaults to the English language. And the next thing we're going to do is to send these source strings, the source phrases, to Transifex. And we're going to use a command here, a Django command. It's called transifex push. And what this command will do is that it will go, like Dimitri said, it will go through all the files of the Django project, and it will detect and extract all the translatable strings. Okay, it has found the 4 strings, and it has also pushed them to Transifex. And 2 things to note here. The first is that this is something that we can do as early as we want in the process. So if we want the localization, the translation process to start early, for example, we can add 4 strings in our content in the code and push them to Transifex, and the translators can start working on them. And then we can push more and so on. And the second thing is that if we have multiple development teams working on different features, all of these teams can work independently, and they can push the content, the phrases, the different phrases independently to Transifex, which is really awesome because you don't need to wait. You don't need to coordinate with the other developers. Say, no, I have this file here, and I have these phrases. Let's see if there are conflicts and so on. Transifex Native uses no files. So what the command did here was that it took the strings, created a single payload, and made an API request to the Transifex, to this CDS service, and so the strings arrived at Transifex without any files. So let's go here to the resource that this Django project is associated with, and if we reload, we'll see that we expect to see 4 phrases here. By the way, I'm running everything here on my local machine, so most of the things are a bit slow. This is not Transifex production. Okay, let's give it a moment. We should be able to see the 4 strings. Okay, here they are. And now, let's say that I am the translator, and I'm going to start translating the phrases. I'm going to use machine translation. I think I did it a bit too fast. Okay, give me a second here. While this is loading, I'm going to translate 3 of the 4 phrases, and I'm going to leave the 4th phrase empty, and we'll see how the SDK handles each case. Okay, so machine translating. Okay, now while these 2 phrases are being saved, we're going to go back to the website. And now, as a developer, I don't need to do anything at all. I don't have to release or deploy my software. I don't have to run a command to pull the translations to the application. I don't have to rely on a CI CD script or hook to pull the translations in. There's nothing I need to do. Right now, I'm just a visitor of the website, and I just reload the page. And as we can see, these 3 phrases here are shown in German. Okay, behind the scenes, what happened is that the native SDK pulled the translations from the CDS and then displayed them to the user. Okay, and the 4th one, as we see here, is still in English. And that the reason is that it doesn't have a translation. So let's see what we can do about this. We can change this behavior. So instead of the source string, we can display something different. Let's give it a moment here. So I have enabled pseudo localization, as Dimitri said before. And now we see that the 4th string here, the last string, is shown with accented characters. And this is a great way to have, to make the phrases stand out during development, debugging, and QA testing. That these phrases are missing and they don't have translations. And you can also choose from 3 or 4 other options we have on how to display missing strings. And you can even create your own, which is very, very easy to do. It's just a function you create and you plug it in the SDK, and you can define in a very custom way what gets displayed to the users if there is an empty translation. Okay, now let's go back to the code. I'd like to show you something different now. So, 2 things here to note. One of them is that this is a phrase, it's a more complex phrase than before because it uses ICU syntax for placeholders. So this name here inside the curly braces, this is how you denote a variable placeholder on ICU. So when you push this string to Transifex, we're going to see how it gets translated and then how we render it back to the website. So that's one. And the other thing is, like Dimitri said, it has to do with context and metadata. So here, as a developer, I can insert inside my code for any phrase. I can add a bunch of metadata like the context. So what context this phrase has, the character limit, a developer comment, a comment for the translators to help them, pay attention to something specific about the string, and even the tags. And we are really, really excited about this because this way we have managed to, bring this information, the way to enter this information into the system, into the localization flow, right to the place where it should be, to the developer. Because, this information, the developer is the expert, let's say. It's a person that really knows what these values should be. And they don't have to go to Transifex. They don't have to go to any other place. They can just do this where they live every day inside the code. So let's push again. and we should go to the editor here. Let's see. Let's wait for the command to finish. Something to note here, you can push from your own local machine, or you can do this from a CI/CD script. Okay, I'm going to refresh. And we should be able to see now an extra phrase with the name variable highlighted inside the phrase. Let's give it a moment. Okay, there it is. So this is the placeholder. And if I machine translate, our system knows that this is a placeholder. It protects it from getting translated while the rest of the phrase is translated as it should. And before going back to the website, let me show you the metadata. So you have the tags here, the 2 tags. You have the character limit. You have the context. You have the developer nodes. So the translator really knows, has a lot of context in order to make a better translation. And also an extra thing you get from the native SDK is the occurrences. So here you can see all the places, all the files where this particular phrase exists in. Right now, it's only in one file. This is the file name and this is the line number. But if this exact phrase with the same context was found on other files as well, this would be a list here. Okay, going back here, I'm going to reload. And we see that we get the final translation in German. And instead of the placeholder here, our ICU renderer has taken the actual value of the variable, which is Obi-Wan Kenobi, and has created the final string and rendered it for the users. And that's it for me.
Dimitri, thank you so much for this. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Good. Thank you so much. So a couple of extra things to mention here. Actually, before doing so, let's jump and answer some of the questions that we have. Okay. So Enrique asks, what would happen if 2 developers work on the same file? One removes an existing string and the other one modifies the same string, all in different Git branches. The thing here is that the Transifex push command, it parses the code and looks up all the phrases, right? So if a developer modifies a phrase, their TX push will just append the phrase at the end of the list of the phrases. So if you had like 5 branches that have the exact 4 phrases, in Transifex, you're only going to have 4 phrases. If you modify one in one of the branches, you're now going to have 5 phrases because one of the branches TX push detected a new phrase. If a developer deletes it from one of their branches, it will still stay because all the other branches will have the phrase in them. So in other words, like this is why we're calling this like a global content repository rather than just a TMS, is because we manage the content across the branches and we want people to feel that this is my content regardless of where it came. Samir asks, do you have an SDK for Ruby and Java? Samir, not yet. We wanted to develop this fast and deliver quickly and release it as soon as possible, get feedback before going into new languages. Right now, the one that we're working on and we're actually using in beta in Transifex itself, as usual, like with our own dog food before releasing to everyone else, is JavaScript. However, 2 things. One is we are open to suggestions on what the next ones should be. Ruby and Java sound like really good candidates, as well as Go. And but one of the things that we're most excited about this is because it's open source. We, like, as we were designing this, all these architectural choices, we made a lot of these decisions building the architecture. So porting to a new language is much easier if someone started this from scratch. Like, all the design decisions have been made in a way. So porting it is just taking the code kind of and just re-implementing it in another language. So it's much easier than if you wrote it from scratch. So if you want to help us contribute to these languages, we'd be so happy, like, to help you point out to porting documentation that we have worked on, and hack together, I guess, the new languages ports. Samir also asks, how do we configure what languages to translate to? Well, there are two things here. Dimitri, as in Django, you are defining the languages in the settings file, right?
Yeah, that's right. Mm-hmm.
So on the one hand, there's the consumption of the translatable content in Django, and the developer controls what languages they want to launch. It's their product after all. But on the Transifex side, you set up your languages on a project level. So then any languages that are pushed, any content that is pushed to Transifex will be translated to all those languages. But it's up to the developer which ones to actually use, using the settings file, I guess. And Samir, if you have any follow-up questions, please feel free to ask them. So what else? Let's go to Bashar. Bashar is asking, how about handling right-to-left languages such as Arabic with variables and ICU handling? Dimitri, have we tackled RTL right now?
I don't recall any discussion in the team when developing this, so I'm not sure. I don't know of any specifics about RTL languages with ICU, but this is something which we can look into.
Yes. So Bashar, again, like, we wanted to release this as early as possible as a beta, I guess. So we haven't talked much internally about RTL yet. No. I guess the same applies. The repository is open, and I guess maybe we should share now. Let me share my screen again. Share a couple of so Transifex Native GitHub. So there are a couple of pages that you can refer to when you're thinking about this. The one in our GitHub repository. Let's see.
Transifex Python, Dimitri.
Transifex Python. So the current implementation is under our organization and Transifex Python. And you can find the code here. Feel free to just clone, hack, create pull requests, etc. In addition to that, in our blog, we have a blog post called Introducing Transifex Native, Reimagining Software Localization. And there are a couple of links in here to where you can learn more about it. Most importantly, there's our documentation page in docs.transifex.com that goes over the native architecture, the SDKs that we have right now, and all the specifics that we have implemented that just describes in more detail the actual code. So yes, so Bashar, feel free to just jump in there and help out and help us, or it's something that we have it in our roadmap, because RTL languages are created equal, and we want to make sure that we address them. Federico from Italy asks, can you explain better from a technical point of view how the application automatically pulls new updated translations? Yes. Yes. Thank you. Thank you for the super technical question. Dimitri, do you want to take this one?
Yeah, sure. So when your application, you launch your application, let's say that is a web app on Django. When you start the server, after you deploy, there is an initial warm-up call, let's say, that retrieves the translations from the CDS. So this is the only time where something needs to happen in order to have the translations on your application. So how let me back up and explain it a bit better. You push from the SDK, you push the source strings to Transifex through the CDS, and so the source of truth is Transifex. Okay, and at some point when the SDK requests something from the translations for German, for example, from the CDS, the CDS checks if how fresh it has a caching system, and it checks how fresh its translations are, and it gives back whatever it has at that point. And if the time to live, as we say it as a code, if it's passed, then it asks for new translations from Transifex for fresh content. Okay, and when it has that, it's going to be serving that for some time. The actual time on production right now is 90 minutes, while on the demo that I showed you, for demo purposes, it was 5 or 10 seconds. Okay, so this I didn't mention that during the demo, but so it's not instant, although it seemed it was instant for the demo. In real life, it cannot be instant, of course, for scalability reasons. But we're going to set it to a value that it makes sense, and that it's reliable and it's scalable. And right now, as I said, it's like 1 or 2 hours. And the SDK also has a caching system internally, but it also has a refresh rate where it every hour or so it can ask from the CDS for newer and updated translations. I'm not sure if you have extra questions on that. I'll be happy to answer them.
Dimitri, have we considered a webhook architecture where whenever there are changes, we can tell the CDS just deploy new translations? Yeah. Obviously, like this is not for every customer, because I know that many organizations want that buffer of 1 hour, let's say, for security concerns, make sure that we vet things before they go live. But have we considered that?
Yeah, we have discussed it within the team, and it's something that seems very doable, and I think it's very much possible that we're going to build like something like this as well. Again, this is version 1, and it's just making sure that we deliver something fast, and see how we can build on this.
Cool, awesome.
Federico, yes, the answer, the follow-up question, yes, it's yes. There's a small delay to pull the translations.
All right, Samir. Samir is our MVP of questions, loving it. So Samir asks that this works great for content that is in the code, but what about dynamic translation that comes from a database? So right now, we decided to focus on code, the content that comes from the code, hard-coded strings. And then we played around with a function that basically runs on runtime and takes whatever content it receives and can push it for localization as well. We want to refine that and make sure that it works really well, because it's very easy for dynamic content like that. It's very, very easy to make a mistake, and if you don't mark up like the placeholder very well, you might start sending hello John, hello Mark for translation, so it can jump your word count and your translation cost like suddenly a lot. So once we develop this, and I think it's an awesome feature, and I'm very excited about it personally as well, to just handle content dynamically, and you don't even need to push basically. But we wanted to implement that right in a way that it's going to be safe or from mistakes from people, and also yeah, basically be safe. Now, specifically for database content, not dynamic content necessarily. Let's say that you're a travel app and you have all the airports of the world in a database table and they don't change too frequently. That's something that it's also on our mind. And we were thinking of developing that, like in Django, for example. You could say that this column of the table, I want it multilingual. And the moment you do that, the code, when you run the push command, can just take those phrases and also append them to the payload. So that's something that it's interesting, it's exciting, and it's very useful for many people, I guess. And it's just that we haven't gotten to it yet. Dimitri, anything to add here on this one?
No, I think you pretty much covered everything.
So both dynamic content as well as database content in an elegant way. Like I'm envisioning, like in Django, you could say that, I have this field on my model, like the person's first name. Let's say that we want it localized, and you can just say that it's a multilingual car field. The moment you do that, like the backend will just handle everything for you. Cool. So Enrique asks, how will this work for iOS, macOS apps? Will the app pull strings each time the app is started? Well, Enrique, we haven't ported it to iOS and to iOS yet, right? But the idea here is that wherever you have your code, we feel that you should also have a first cached version of the translations. It's a good idea because the person might start like the app with no internet connection, and you want them to be able to launch it in German. So some of our customers that have implemented this workflow with the traditional Transifex, not with Transifex Native, is that they would cache some translations. So when the app opens, there is content there, but then they will pull fresh content and update it on the fly. And I think that model works really well. We would encourage, the architecture should allow you to have like a cached version and then pull fresh translations frequently.
Something to add here? Sorry, Dimitri.
I was going to say that I do believe that fresh translation should be pulled when the app is started, but also have some cached content there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I want to say that first of all, it's as Dimitri said, the user might not have an internet connection when they run the application, or sometimes I think the iOS may delete the temporary files of an application, the application data. So you should be able to retrieve the translations in any case. You should be able to have something by default. And we are thinking that the SDK, the mobile SDKs, when we get to them, they would just allow you to get the payload, because there are no files again, but the payload that you would get, that the SDK gets from the CDS, to get it and add it to your application bundle, and submit the application to the app stores with the initial translations. But it's as Dimitri said, it's very good to be able to get the first translations, because, for example, especially for mobile, it's really good to be able to fix a typo or something simple like that without having to publish again to the app store, because it's a lot of process. I mean, you have to do many different things. Not only that it has the app on iOS needs to be approved, but also it has some overhead in order to get it up and running, a new version on the app store. And we're also thinking about versioning, because many applications on mobile do not require from the users to all of them have the same version running on their device. So we are also thinking that we could do something there to be able to handle the scenario where different users have different versions of your app, and they use the proper translations that they're compatible with the current version they're running.
So we have another question that came directly, is how is Transifex Native different from solutions that exist today? So I think that compared to all the programming languages, the internationalization support from programming languages, I think we covered the differences. It's fileless, it's over the air, it relies on a cloud-based localization platform like Transifex. I think some other companies out there have solutions that are kind of trying to do a little bit of this, like for iOS and Android. But as far as we know, all of these solutions are based on files, and the support for this rich context is just not there. And many of the other solutions, I guess, for web apps that exist are all of them using files, and they're just not optimized for this kind of cloud-based workflow. And also, I don't think that many are using this appending mechanism that we're using, where we don't have like each branch its own file. It's actually one big content repository, and the phrases are all appended at the end. Another question I see here: how are Transifex Native SDK and affecting security? What are the risks involved? Well, that's the reason we developed the CDS, the content delivery service. We really didn't want to have like a direct connection between the code and Transifex. It's very important for companies out there, for developers, when they're adopting a piece of code to put in your code base to run. It's super important to be able to see the code, so it's super important to be open source. And B, it's very important to rely only on the infrastructure of our customer. So we didn't want to worry on our Transifex side for the scalability if we have like a customer like Google using this for a live app. We really didn't want to have that responsibility. So that's why we developed the CDS. And I guess the CDS is also extensible. So different companies might want to do different things. They might want to pull from Transifex in different moments, right? So to answer a question before, like, because the CDS is open source, you can code it to pull content whenever you want, rather than whenever Transifex decides that there's new content. So that was another consideration. So I think compared to many other ways of doing things like proxy, for example, this is definitely more secure, and honestly, something like, as a developer, I would want to use. I wouldn't want to use like a proxy-based solution for my web app ever. I wouldn't want to trust another company with my code or send the content through another company's website. This is something that a customer, an organization can fully control the experience and the code. As a small example about this is what happens when there's no content available, like this fallback mechanism that Dimitris shared. Like, because we don't get to decide what the fallback mechanism is, but the customer controls it. Depending on the organization, you might have different fallback mechanisms. For example, if you don't have a translation in Brazilian Portuguese, and by default the TMS falls back to Portuguese of Portugal, it creates a case where Portuguese for Portugal translator can affect the live website of the Brazilian Portuguese. Whereas with the code, because you're running the code, you can choose where to fall back with your translations. So it just gives so much more flexibility. And for some companies, that security is a big concern, and consideration. Controlling the code is super important. How can I get started with Transifex Native? Well, the best way to do that is look at our blog post, the Reimagining Software Localization, and just look at our documentation and run pip install transifex-python and just play around with it like Dimitris showed. The code is there, so we're encouraging everyone to hack with the code and just let us know what you guys think. The other thing is, if you'd like a demo, just reach out to our team, and our product team will probably reach out, because receiving feedback is so important for us right now, to arrange a demo or like a joint session. Mike is asking, you have said about appending strings in a project. What about detecting and removing strings that are not used? If no mechanism there, the word count can only go up. Dimitri, how are we handling right now deletion of strings? From what I understand, we are not doing it right now, right?
Well, we're not doing anything automatic, like Mike is asking there. What we have is an option, the transifex push command that I showcased before. There's a purge option there you can add, and whatever you push is going to replace anything else that there is up on the resource. So there is a way to do this if you want to. But what Mike says there is something that we have discussed internally, and we could take advantage of being able to detect all the strings, because this lives in the code, and we could implement something like that. We could purge, we could remove the strings that are not used anymore, and there are many ways to do that. Not immediately, let's say, maybe I don't know. There are ways to do this with with the flow that it makes sense for the customers. Technically, it's something that we can do.
I think the most important thing to note here is, because the content in Transifex is not reflecting one-to-one like actual files, but it's just phrases, then it makes it much more easy right now for people to just go in Transifex and delete the phrase. But the way that we're envisioning this, it should be, again, as simple as possible. So I don't know, like an ideal workflow for me in the future is Transifex knows which phrases are not used anymore and are orphaned, which branches went away, so this phrase is probably not used anywhere right now, and just move it to another part, like an archived phrases part of your organization that the word count doesn't count, and the translators are not working. And if that phrase shows up ever again, it will just reappear. It will not really be deleted. It will just show up again and resurface, I guess. So make it super easy and simple to manage those orphan phrases. All right, I think we're coming up on time. So let me share just a couple more things before we wrap up. I did mention that the code is open source, so feel free to just share your feedback to us and reach out directly. And let me switch window again. Yeah, the other thing is that we're hiring engineers. If you are an engineer and you're watching this and you're excited as much as we are about this, please feel encouraged to take a look at our openings. Or if you know someone that is excited about these technologies, let him know or her know that that we're hiring. And that's it. Lilia, do we have anything else that we need to mention before wrapping up? I'm guessing Lilia is trying to enable her microphone and camera right now. Probably not. So anyway, thank you everyone for being here. I really appreciate the time you put behind this. We're hoping that you're as excited as we are. And see you online and on GitHub. Dimitri, thank you so much. And Lilia Panagiotis, thank you for putting this together. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you all.
Take care. Bye-bye.